Okay,
Yeah.
let's move into more Inquest.
Right. So I um I had two more sessions of that the mystery that I've been that I've been running for people, and one of them was the best session that we've ever had, and the other one was the worst. So
A useful
yes,
pairing. Yeah.
yeah, with no offense meant to the players that played in the worst, although um, I think that the main difference actually was, the players. Um, and it's slightly off topic, but in the good game, I played live, so I played in person, and we also had the quite wonderful experience of playing with a blind person,
Ah,
um, which I was slightly anxious about because I had like all these pictures prepared for the characters, but actually it was pretty easy, and she really like she was the best player at the table. So
that's
I'm
so tempting to dive into as an issue of its own, but that would detract perhaps from the Inquest
yes,
thing. So if we focus on like what she did that was good play as such,
yeah.
that would
So
be very useful for talking about Inquest. Well,
but
let's move though then to do you want to talk about like each one of those sessions separately, or do you want to have kind of a
um,
running comparison, or how do you want to do
um
that?
okay, let's I want to focus on like a topic, like a thing
Right.
that I understood, and maybe we can take. I don't want to like do a go through each session because I think we're getting to the point that like we understand how the game works a little bit.
Hmm.
So I kind of want to focus on the things that I noticed.
Okay.
So do you remember that I sent you that extract from Dogs in the Vineyard? Which
Yes.
like the way that the let's say mystery discovery works is very similar to how a dog's town unfolds, right? And specifically, I have all of these nice, cool things prepared. And if I start like kind of simulating in the sense of like, oh, but this guy wouldn't know this, so he's not gonna say anything, right? And then the information doesn't get to the player. Um, it's a lot less fun because I don't get to see how that thing that I prepared interacts with the player character, right?
True. Can I talk here, or should I let you go on?
I want to finish, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So in what I've realized is that I told you we over prepared, right?
Hmm.
In the preparation, there's essentially written like who knows what, and I've realized that's completely to be thrown out the window. Like I just like any NPC that might reasonably know about something will know about it when I need to, right? And I'm not giving like information for free, but essentially the other thing is that when they there's also another rule that I've added is like that they always know if somebody's lying. So if they fail the roll, the person doesn't tell them the information,
But they
but
know
they
they're
know
lying.
that
Right.
they know they're lying,
Okay.
right?
I'm I'm going to jump in now if that's okay.
Yeah,
Let's go super intellectual for a minute and think about information and fiction.
yeah,
Cause and effect are reversed, right? I mean, in other words, the big difference between those two things you just talked about was presuming is insisting that this guy doesn't know anything
yeah,
versus not insisting that anyone potentially knows everything and all you have to do is roll, which I think is a little too extreme, right?
yeah,
But instead saying giving credence to the idea that this person might reasonably know it. You see the interesting thing? I mean, the first one where you say, well, I can't tell them, this guy doesn't know, it's not because that guy doesn't know, it's because you're not even considering whether he knows. Right? So that means you're blocking it very, very deliberately, or the GM or whoever is blocking it very deliberately and saying, well, the guy doesn't know that, is actually like a denial factor. Because the opposite is not saying, well, he definitely knows it, everyone knows everything. The opposite, as you described it, is saying, well, a lot of these people may well reasonably know at least something.
Yeah.
And that's very important, because if you do the first way, which is to basically wall off every way to get the information except that one person, that means that you're pre-planning the revelation coming from that person at such a place and time as you feel like it. So,
well, for each of them, we have several places where information might be gained.
Sure.
But it is, most of it in the adventure is written like, oh, these guys know about this, these guys know about that.
Which makes perfectly
right?
good sense. But
Yeah.
the idea is that what I'm saying is that makes perfectly good sense, because all you're doing is looking across the NPCs and basically not blocking them for information that they could reasonably have. You're not walling it off in terms of a preferred interaction by which you would like them to get that information.
Yeah.
And that is the big difference. And that's what Vincent is writing about when he's talking about this, he's saying the information is available in hundreds of different ways, maybe not infinitely so per person, but certainly available lots of ways. If this group plays and they find out X in the first 10 minutes, there's nothing wrong with that. And there's also nothing wrong with it if they never find it out or find it out in the last 10 minutes.
Yeah.
We don't have a revelation style sequence. You know, that the big revelation is not the big boss.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he's driving at. And I think this is sort of me paraphrasing what you're saying and focusing on the fact that it's not generated in any kind of, it's functional play here is not generated by any kind of well, let me put it away slightly differently. It is dishonest to wall off the arrival of information in the fictional circumstances in which it may well come, and that those fictional circumstances in a scenario of this kind are variable and scattered throughout the whole landscape, right? There's not like one place where you go to get it.
So yes, although I think my point is a little bit more sophisticated.
Okay.
Because all of that you said was clear to me from the first moment that I wrote this game, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't know if do you know what a dependency chart is? So it's a concept in computer science, and it has been applied to the design of point and click adventure games, which the ones that tend to have sort of a non-linear order of discovery of puzzles, and it's one that I've applied to the design of the adventure and that I want to write in the game. Essentially, the idea is that, and also with the implied, with the very strongly implied, this very strong implication that this is not the only way to find out. It's just guaranteeing that there is at least one.
Right.
And dependency charts are, as opposed to a flow chart, right? A flow chart tells you one solution to one problem. Mm-hmm. You read it from the start to the end, mm-hmm. right? A dependency chart just tells you what is necessary to solve the problem. So it's in a one-to-many relationship to flowcharts that might
Right.
solve it,
Mhm.
right? You start from the end and you read it
Yeah.
towards the back, right? So to create the available information that is necessary to figure out what's going on, we put it on a dependency chart, a small one, where we say like, okay, hypothetically, these informations may lead to this one,
Right.
and then to get to this one, you may need these, but you can also skip it. Like if you figure that out before this is not a mandated order,
Reading
right?
reading it as a reverse flowchart makes a lot of sense to me.
Yes, it's the inverse. It's the complement of a flowchart.
I completely get that. That works.
There can
very
be
well.
potentially an infinite or at least a very high number of ways to implement a dependency chart in a flowchart, because it's a declarative style of programming a thing. So
if we take this to role playing, that means that it doesn't, of all the, say, 100 things, let's just say 100 things that they might learn in the first stages of play, it doesn't matter which ones, theoretically, I mean, experientially it'll matter a lot, but it doesn't matter which ones that they actually pick up as long as it brings them one node deeper.
Yeah.
Okay, now, the important thing about this is that the things that they don't know of that first array, right? The things they will actually create a new situational information bank, right? There's things they know and things they don't know when they get that new node, and that therefore throws us into a multivariate set of profile of information of potential profiles. Now, under those circumstances, we add the dice rolls themselves, which introduce probability and they introduce differential math into this.
Yes.
Once you start doing that, then we are potentially entering what I consider to be the chaos theory state that I talked about in the course. So
totally agreed.
This is working out very nicely. I'm hearing everything that makes a lot of sense to me.
But this is how the game has worked from the beginning. So I think the thing that I've realized now is that, and I was always skeptical of how Lorenzo over prepared but it's not his fault. I told him I don't know what the information we're going to need is, so he just wrote everything, which is fine. But the way now is that the stuff that is put in the dependency chart explicitly, there's no locations in the dependency chart and there's no characters in the dependency chart.
Of course, that I get. It's information.
That's very, very important because it's a very common misunderstanding of dependency charts is to put
because if you do that, then all you're doing is just making a maze that you're supposed to be going to from place to place, person to person.
Then you're just making a dungeon map at that point.
Right. And I had exactly the same problem with the relationship maps in the Sorcerer's Soul. Because people said, oh, it's just a dungeon except that they're people instead of rooms. And I was like, no, the idea is that you're going to end up with a unique profile of what you do and you don't know, and the ones that you've encountered, they are going to be responsive due to those ties, that are marked on the map at the very least. So therefore, once we move into play, the scenario is I cannot tell you what play will be like halfway through. That's the point. But no, they would say, oh, well, you tie it to, that's a person on the map, thinking that you go to the person and you find out that thing, and no, what matters is the response of that person. Right. So this makes a lot of sense to me, what you're saying.
In fact, we have a relationship map that is in parallel to the...
Which makes perfectly good sense.
So the thing that Lorenzo added is that, which was more or less under my direction, but not exactly, every character has written all of the information that they could possibly know, right? And this is limited in a way that, like, in my opinion, what now we should... So the point is, I've realized through play, play works perfectly well if you follow this instruction, because it doesn't often happens that a character has no interesting information to give.
Right, you're skipping, like, little clauses in what you're saying because you know what they
Right.
are, but I don't.
Right.
What
Sorry.
is the procedure that works? You haven't said it.
Right. So when you're talking, so there's, um, I guess, two types of investigation scenes that happen. There's like you're investigating rooms or you're talking to people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about the talking to people, right?
So far, so good.
Um, when you talk to people, depending on both your role and what you ask, you might get different information, right? So the question is, does this information come from a prepared fixed list, or does the keeper just kind of make up whatever that character knows at that time that makes sense?
Mm.
And the procedure that works but is not the best is the fact that you have this fixed list of things that that character may or may know, right, and may provide. Um, and it does work because in all of the previous sessions, the game worked pretty okay with this. But I've realized that if I give myself the freedom to decide at that moment if that character knows something or not, or knows something interesting or not, then or what that character knows, then actually I can push the play into a way more powerful state. So that was a limiting mechanic. It works. It was acceptable, but it was limiting.
On the other
Um,
hand, that improvisational aspect to this seems to me like it has a great deal of steering power and pacing
yeah,
power that actually interferes with play and reduces us from a chaos state back to spontaneous order, which is to say boring and planned.
that's a very good question. So what I've it's harder and more sophisticated to get it to a point where you're like, okay, I can do this, but I cannot do this other thing, right?
Right. I can't do this thing
Um,
with it. Right.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So very good, very very good question. So the thing that I've realized is that so certain characters have essential parts about themselves, and essentially the game is really this is I've realized it's very story now. Okay, it's like it's in all of its instances. I didn't realize at first, but now I kind of see it. But it's weird because I didn't set out to do it, but that's just what happened. But what we're interested in discovering at the end of the day is the I guess like how the characters, how the detectives react to the information, right? The discovery process is sure there's an element of challenge there, but it's mostly in support of that, right?
Yes, well,
It doesn't.
all the discoveries does really is create the profile of known and unknown in which
Yeah.
they're going to make decisions of this kind.
Yes.
And I
And
totally
in
get
fact,
that. Mm-hmm.
I've removed all failure states from the game
Mm-hmm.
because of this. Because there's I actually oh okay we'll get that into later, but into that later. But the point is, given that what we're interested in discovering is not particularly like whether you can figure it out or not,
Right.
it's obviously introduces an element of variance, of chaos, of differential outcome,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not. It's providing information in different situations, but you need to discover something of what's happening. I need to
Sure.
bring it to you.
Right. There will be. It's a little
So
right. Uh huh. Uh huh.
so the reason for me to do it is not that I want to give you this information, right? Because that still depends on what you ask and of how well your role goes.
Right.
But I can decide in that moment that that character knows about this and either say, oh, he looks like he's lying if you fail the roll, right? Or like he looks like he's holding something back, or like he looks like he dislikes that character, right? But if you win the roll, or if you get two successes, then maybe he starts into a rant saying, oh,
Right.
that Leopoldo,
Right.
he's a.
But what if you decide he doesn't know and then you get your successes, then you know that he doesn't know and it's not a
Yeah,
lie. Okay. Right,
yeah,
which is fair.
right.
Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
which is fair, right?
But I
Um,
think given the outcomes of the roles being laid out like you just did, let's go back again to the question of whether they know or not know. The phrase you used earlier is reasonable. Now the trouble
yeah.
is that word hides a multitude of sins if you're sitting there deciding in the moment in play.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that there should, okay, there may be an area that you're leaving squishy for play about knowing or
Yeah,
not knowing something for a given NPC.
yeah.
But should there not also be for every NPC at least a certain amount of information that you know they know, period? And
Fair
a
enough.
certain, and a, hold on, and a certain amount of information that you
You
know
know, they
they
don't
don't,
know.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
even
Fair
if
enough.
those
Yeah.
two bands are not that big, they exist,
Yes.
and that then you have wiggle room for play. Now, for me, I'll let you know that I often feel a deep personal alarm go off when I'm playing and I suddenly realize that I don't have a good standard to go by for whether somebody knows or doesn't know something, or in the case of the recent traveler session, just how hostile they would be if they had the drop on the character. When he
Right.
runs into these two fugitives, this is what happened, right? He runs into these two fugitives. It's at very close range and it's in an urban environment. So that means they came around a corner basically and
Right.
ran into each other. And he was surprised for 3 rounds. And these two fugitives are armed. He's not, but they're also terrified and they're in this police state. And that's all I knew. I
Yeah.
needed to have just a little bit more context in order to decide whether they'll attack or not. The roll, by the way, gave me the option for attack. That's the point. It didn't, there were other rolls that would have meant they ran off or meant they would have attacked, but I ended up
Yeah.
in the gray area where they might, and it's up to me. But I didn't have a, I had not quite thought through the back story of any of this enough for me to say, oh, well, now I decide they attack and feel very justified in doing it, or saying now they run off. They have plenty of time to run off with 3 rounds, um, and feel justified in that.